Welcome, everybody. You're doing very well indeed. And I think now is the time to brew some questions for this wonderful panel. So just to go through everyone, it's just wonderful to have all four of you here with us. Thank you. So Rob, as Saul just said, North Norfolk District Council's Assistant Director for Sustainable Growth. In your stuff, you say, this involves developing actions to achieve the Council's Net Zero 2030 commitments, initiatives that help our economy prosper and meet North Norfolk's diverse communities. He added this at the end. He marvels at the resilience of nature and admires the kestrels that have taken residence again in the tower of his local church in Corston. And we have the Vicar of Corston at the back on sabbatical. Lucy, lovely that you are here, and we are so grateful for the National Heritage Lottery just to enable all of this. Is the policy project manager in the central policy team of the National Lottery Heritage Fund. A background in accountancy. Did the Bishop get you in on this? Sits on the Church of England's Net Zero Carbon Grants panel and is a regular church crawler. And this is her first Norfolk church. And just literally 2 yards from where I was sitting, that's the vault. Do you see the vault? The square bit there is a vault. I'll get them all interested in that later. And the panel for that is just by the door. So you can have a look at that. I'm not sure if the rector will allow us to open it. Nigel, Nigel, I'm grateful because Nigel's come in late in the day, and anyone here who is involved in Eco Church or has been for a time knows and met Nigel, certainly on the eco forums that we do in the diocese. Trained as an urban and regional planner, developed an interest in garden and landscape design, is deeply involved in the church in Haveringland, and I've got to come and see it at some stage, and all of this has led Nigel to co-found Norfolk Green Care Network, a thriving group of 300 people involved and interested in supporting green care. Nigel is a church ambassador, which is helping churches in this diocese with their buildings and fabric. And I think lots of churches need that. You know, we are overstretched, as we've already spoken about. Last but not least, Nick Cannon, Secretary of the Norwich Diocesan Advisory Committee, DAC, and leads the Church Care and Development team at Diocesan House. He joined the diocese in May 2022 after a 34-year career in the diplomatic service, and his career in the diplomatic service is well worth quizzing him on. I have today, and you can tell him which countries he's been on, and I'm sure if you heard the countries he's been in, you may have extra questions for him. But I'm not going to mention what they are because we're focusing today on the environment. So it's wonderful to have all four of you here. Saul allowed me to kick off with a question, and to get them thinking, we asked them to send in questions. So I'm going to kick off with the first question, Rob, which you put, because I think this is a question that really goes to the heart of some of that. But I'm not going to ask it to you, Rob, first, because you've thought about it. You may have. So how can the tension between conserving our built heritage and mitigating the causes of climate emergency be reconciled? How can the tension between conserving... wait, hold on, I've stepped on too far. Well, I have. That's the preamble. That question is coming. Think on it. Before we do it, preamble, I hand over to Nigel. Introduce yourself a bit more.
Okay, thanks very much, David. Well, lovely to be here this afternoon and this morning as well. It's been a really inspiring day so far. I guess I'm here wearing two hats today, which David has already responded to, mentioned. The first one is my involvement with my local church in Haveringland, which is about half an hour's drive from here, in a largely rural area. I'm a church warden there, and I'm project managing a major investment in repairs and improvements to the church called Building the Future, Repairing the Past. I suppose from today's point of view, a very interesting thing is the environmental angle. Apart from what we're doing to the building, which I won't go into in detail, We had a germ of an idea about 5 years ago of an environmental project where we would stretch from our conservation churchyard, which is about, I guess, an acre in area, to work with the immediate area, landowners in the immediate area. There's a hillside animal sanctuary, grazing fields around us, and one or two other places as well. About a year ago, I think it was, when we'd finally got some money from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and we're very grateful for it, I had a discussion with Natural England, and they said, why don't you think bigger? So we are literally now on the cusp of going from 1 acre to 60,000 acres in a landscape scale nature recovery project centred on Havering land, geographically at least, but including a much, much bigger area. We have money from Broadland Council to do a feasibility study, which is hopefully going to lay the foundations for a much longer term project of nature recovery. The important point being that this is a community-led approach. It's not just about farmers, those are very important players in the landscape they are. It's about everyone. It's what you can do in your back garden. It's what schools can do in their grounds. It's what churches can do in their churchyards and other land, and so on. So that's something I think that's relevant for today. And I guess the point there is that churches can be the catalyst for that wider approach to environmental improvement. The second hat is the Norfolk Green Care Network, which, as I said, was set up about 4 years ago. We've now got about 300 members. Just before COVID, it was launched, and it was total coincidence that it was. But as you will appreciate, during COVID, I think the importance of us connecting with nature to promote our health and well-being came to the fore. And hopefully with you and others, that stayed as an important feature of life today. Green care is defined in very many different ways. We've taken a very broad approach to it. It's everything from promoting health to helping recovery from illness and aiding, if you like, coping with illness as well. In many ways, though, over those few years, it's essentially an interesting coincidence that this session is called Shades of Green, because this is a term I used recently to describe our journey in the Green Care Network, which has gone from that initial focus on health and well-being to recognising that these other shades of green, whether that's food security, biodiversity improvement, mitigating climate change, are all interconnected. No big surprise there. But by doing one, you can often attend and deal with some of the others. So if you're working in a community garden, for example, you're getting the health and well-being benefits of doing that, but you're also contributing to food security. You're also possibly mitigating climate change and so on. So shades of green, I think, is a very appropriate term. The final thing I want to say is really going back to Kitty's presentation about, I think, children and young people and the impact, particularly of COVID, on them. Very significant, and I think we're still living with the impact of that in many ways at schools and so on. The Green Care Network has been at the front of starting a number of initiatives and campaigns, one of which is called First Nature. And this was set up a couple of years ago, and it's all about expanding nature connection opportunities for children and young people. I'm very pleased to say, unfortunately the Bishop is no longer with us, but very pleased to say and very grateful to the Bishop of Norwich for sponsoring a First Nature Award, Bishop of Norwich First Nature Award, which is in its second year now, and it just opened this week literally. So if you're interested, look at the First Nature website, and it's all about awarding, if you like, or rewarding, recognising great projects that are already expanding nature connection opportunities for children and youngsters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I've made some notes. I'll kind of explain my job, possibly, as we go through the questions, but my role at the District Council is about securing sustainable growth for the district, about economic development, meeting housing needs, addressing issues such as coastal erosion, coastal management and change, and also climate change and mitigating the causes of climate change and trying to take the journey on the council on the journey to net zero. So lots have been said about the road to net zero today. Bishop Graham this morning had some quite stark data to present to us, and that drove the message home well and truly, I think, to everybody. But the road to net zero certainly isn't the motorway. We're not travelling anywhere nearly as fast as we need to. It's a residential neighbourhood in a Welsh town at best, and that's controversial. Why is slowing traffic to 20 miles an hour controversial? I don't know. The road to climate-induced catastrophe, at least catastrophe for life on Earth, is one that doesn't seem to have any speed limits. So we're going rapidly in the wrong direction. The faster we mitigate the causes of global heating, the less severe the consequences will be. So there is a tipping point. We need to act soon. We need to act fast, and I think that's recognised by the science. North Norfolk District Council is certainly not one of the culprits in the emissions arms race, but our emissions from all of our estate and operations amount to something in the order of 1% of the district-wide emissions. So that's from businesses, from individuals, from households, from travel, and from churches. Churches are certainly not one of the main culprits either. The District Council's emissions were in the last year that we measured 3,494 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. So that's 1% of the district's total. The church's one will be far less than that. But this is what the District Council has achieved in terms of lowering its emissions over the last 5 years. We're now producing 50% of the emissions we were 5 years ago. So we've made progress, but we've still got an awfully long way to go. Responding appropriately and rapidly to the climate emergency is something that all individuals and organisations need to take responsibility for, regardless of the magnitude of their emissions. But organisations such as the Church and the District Council have a particularly critical role. The Council's Environmental Charter and our Net Zero Action Plan and our Greener Future Corporate Plan set priorities for emissions reductions to become net zero by 2030, similar to the Church's declaration. But we need to recognise our role also as community leaders. So whilst reducing the District Council's emissions and the Church reducing its emissions to net zero, whatever that means, by 2030, actually it's a small proportion of the total emissions, but we are community leaders. What we do, we can demonstrate to others how they can follow, and that's where the greater gains can be made. So that's why our roles, and that's why I'm delighted to be here today, are particularly important. The other thing I want to pick up on, I think, is adaptation. Because we're already locked into the consequences of that climate change, we need to develop resilience and the means by which we can adapt. Part of my role is coastal management, so in some ways, in fact, there's rock being delivered today in Cromer to help to reinforce the sea defences. We can protect some places for a short period of time in a sort of geological time frame. It's a minute period of time. Other areas we can't protect, and those areas need to adapt. We can't just abandon things. We can't expect people to go on that journey towards net zero if we're going to see the consequences not addressed. But an example of that, of adaptation, the church in Sidestrand rolled back, that's the common phrase that's used, it was rebuilt inland around 140 years ago. The coast has been eroding for an awfully long time, since the last ice age, and people have adapted to it. In fact, we've adapted to seasonal change, we've adapted to weather changes. We have places like Winterton and Somerton, which have summer and winter in their titles for a reason. We can adapt. As a species, we can be incredibly versatile, and that's what we need to encourage. And I think the actions, such as those expressed at this conference today, can demonstrate how we can act. And there is some positivism, so to pick up on Kitty's excellent talk earlier on. Haysborough Church and its graveyard, which has some very important graves from maritime deaths, will undoubtedly be lost within our lifetimes to coastal erosion. There was an interesting conundrum some 10, 15 years ago when lines were drawn on a map that showed where coastal erosion rates would be. They are accelerated by global warming, incidentally, not caused by it. The lines were drawn on the map, and experts were acknowledging that, yes, there would be key pieces of infrastructure lost, and those graves, don't worry, they will be relocated. So people, living people, whose houses were teetering on the edge of the cliff, had nothing. Their lives and their houses wouldn't be relocated, but don't worry, the graves in the graveyard would. Actually, not long before that, when I was a planner at the District Council, I was responsible for giving planning permission for the extension of Mundesley Graveyard in a seaward direction. I couldn't refuse it, but I remember writing a note on the planning permission that was granted to say, please be aware these graves will be at risk of erosion within a very short space of time. I won't name the time, but that's a fact. So the action the church is taking and leading on to mitigate climate change, and Mundesley Church actually is one of the ones that's having solar PV on its roof. So mitigating climate change is critical. All of the work that you've talked about today, working with nature and adapting to climate change, is absolutely supported as well. So I'll pass on the microphone there. Oh, sorry, one more thing that I wanted to say. Let us not be known as the Age of Stupid. If you haven't seen that film, there's a great film that was about 12 years ago called The Age of Stupid. It showed that we have all the knowledge, we have the information, we have the technological means to adapt, but we don't. We chose not to. Thank you.
Rob, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, Saul and David. I've been in hundreds of churches and sat on hundreds of bar stools, but this is the first time I've done both in the same place. My job is as Secretary of the Diocesan Advisory Committee on the Care of Churches, and for those who don't know it, it's basically the church's planning permission system. So if you want to make major changes to your church, you apply to the DAC. The DAC is a committee of experts, currently 16 volunteer experts, and they include architects, a lawyer, a historian, several members of the clergy, a builder, to have a spread of opinion. And then they review all applications to make radical changes or even relatively minor changes to churches, and make recommendations to the Chancellor. And the Chancellor is basically the bishop's judge, basically. And they process about 95 applications every year. It differs from the civil planning system in that there is a very strong focus on obtaining a consensus. So the DAC system, the faculty system, aims at, first they consult expert advisors on heating, lighting, ecological matters, archaeology, and so on. They're also statutorily obliged to consult our heritage partners, Historic England, Society of Protection of Ancient Buildings, Victorian Society, Church Buildings Council, and so on. And they're also obliged to consult the community. So at one point in the application, details of what's being planned are nailed up in the church porch, and people have a month to comment on it. Then the papers go off to the Chancellor, and he takes the final decision. There is an appeal system. This is a full legal system, but the objective really is to have everybody on board to achieve a consensus on each application. Key point of interest in this area is that the consensus is shifting, and that's the point I think that the Bishop made during his speech. And so I've seen applications approved by the Chancellor in the 2 years that I've been here that I wouldn't have expected 2 years ago. One example is the putting of solar panels on to a Grade 1 listed building, the St Peter Mancroft example. And the Chancellor's judgment in that case, which was a full legal judgment running to 30-odd pages or whatever, it's well worth reading. It's available. It's available online. Another one was the putting the permission, both from the church and also from the local planners, to put visible solar slates on the church at Mundesley, or All Saints Church at Mundesley. Again, the Peter Mancroft ones are hidden from the ground. They can't be seen from ground level. The Mundesley ones are straight out there. A third one was the recent air source heat pump case at Harlesden, where, unlike the Hethel case, which the Bishop referred to, where the heat pumps were stashed away on the roof, out of sight, at Harlesden, their fridge-size unit's been authorised on the ground. It's a very elaborate and modern system, but thoroughly justified. So we're seeing the boundaries of what is acceptable moving, and I think that should encourage people who've got more radical ideas in this area, who want to give it a try. I think many of the myths about the past, or maybe the truth about the past, that these things would be stopped by the heritage partners or by the local authorities or by the DAC, are falling away. You can do more perhaps now than you could in the past. Set against that, in certain areas, the Church Buildings Council is tightening up, and the classic is heating, whereas in the past, people could nail up bar heaters in the chancel and get away with it. Now, anybody with a new heating scheme is expected to explore all the options open to them, to consider whether infrared heating is appropriate, underfloor heating, solar panels, air source heat pumps, and so on. So it's expected a kind of holistic approach to heating your church, and that's part of the application process these days. Where to start? The Canadian thinker Jordan Peterson was once asked for advice about what advice he should offer to young men starting off in life. And he said, well, first, tidy up your bedroom. And it's a bit like that with the church. As the bishop said, don't talk about solar panels or air source heat pumps if you've got a hole in the window or a draft is coming under the door. So look at the basics first in any proposal, to make sure that you've dealt with the basics of the church before escalating up the level towards elaborate heating or energy schemes. Whereas there is plenty of advice out there. We're always happy to offer advice. My colleagues in the environment team at Dust and House can offer advice. We have a DAC heating advisor who is an expert in the field, who's prepared to advise. We have the church ambassador. The church ambassadors, who are a team of people who have usually had an experience in a project in one or more parishes and are prepared to share that advice with everyone. We've got a couple of them here, of course Nigel's one as well. And these are people with a range of expertise, some of it technical expertise, some of it fundraising or grant application expertise. So they're very useful people to know. There's a lot of advice on the Church Buildings Council website. It's really good. Their one on solar panels is spot on. It's used by the DAC as a reference document. So basically, if an application for solar panel is compliant with Church Buildings Council advice, it will get through, and if it's not, it won't. It's a tick box exercise. We're encouraging them to do the same one for air source heat pumps. That doesn't exist as yet. But there's a lot of good stuff in there about heating, LED lights, and so on, which is other sort of eco-related projects, which is very useful. What happens if you can't do it? And I think that was to answer perhaps like halfway towards answering the exam question that you set at the beginning, David, is that, well, sometimes it's not possible to move things in the direction that we would want. There are certain churches where oil-sourced heating is the only alternative. There are some places which have perfectly functioning gas boilers, where, although one would want to move away from fossil fuels, if something is relatively new and is functioning properly, it would not be a good use of the church's energy and funds to move away from it. I came across an example a couple of weeks ago of a church which wanted to move from a gas boiler to electric boiler, but found that the electric boiler would be 3 times the cost. So rather than the cost of upgrading their gas boiler was only a third of going over to electric. Logically, in those terms, with limited resources, it wouldn't have been appropriate to go go down that road. There is the issue of green tariffs. You know, what happens if a green tariff is more expensive than the normal tariff? And that's a decision for each parish as to where its priorities lie, whether they should pay more to go green or whether with limited funds or other calls on their funding, they should stick with what they've got. That was really what I had, and well, happy to take any questions, obviously, now or later.
Thank you very much, Nick. Can I pass to Lucy?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. It is, you said, my first time in a Norfolk church, and it's a great pleasure because I think these buildings are truly incredible and that you should be very proud of them. They're just fantastic spaces. So, yes, I'm from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. You may already have heard of us, but I'm going to give you a quick summary of who we are. We are the biggest funder of heritage in the UK. We're an arm's length body of DCMS and pretty much the last of those bodies which works UK-wide and not devolved. We've existed since 1994, and each year we fund UK heritage to the tune of about £330 million a year, which is a fair amount. So we're very proud of our record. And I did want to first of all say that we fund a huge breadth of heritage. We fund from sort of park restoration projects in local town centres to national or globally sort of leading museums, to parish church roofs and restoration projects. So we are proud of our very broad definition of heritage, but I am also aware that for the places of worship sector, as we call it, and particularly churches, which are most historic places of worship in this country, we are a key funder for repairs and have been for some years. And again, we're proud of our track record there. We've funded. We've invested sort of over 1.06 billion in places of worship since 1994, and that numbers just will grow. So we're very again, like I say, proud of our record with churches, and so I wanted to kind of sort of express today that we, as we look into the future, are continuing to be very interested in protecting, saving the heritage of places of worship, of historic churches. We have a new strategy, Heritage 2033. There are paper copies over on the table if you're interested. I'm not going to go through it all, but something to note from there is that instead of outcomes, we now have 4 investment principles. Saving heritage, protecting the environment, inclusion and access, and organisational sustainability. And the key point there is that we will not, we're not dictating what emphasis you should put on the 4. So it is, every project has to meet all 4, but there does not, as if you need a project that meets them all equally. If you want to focus on one, you can. And so, as I said, sort of one of them is related to protecting the environment, which means that in relation to today and what we're talking about, I think the potential for National Lottery grants to places of worship, to churches that are both thinking about its sort of the condition of its building, its fabric, its sustainability into the future, but also how it's impacting the environment, fits pretty much dead on with what we're trying to do as a funder, and so to go into that protecting the environment investment principle a little bit more, we're defining it as 3 elements. It's helping heritage to adjust to the impacts of climate change, helping organisations to reduce their impact on the environment and help climate change itself, also supporting biodiversity to make sure that that within the environment is something that we support. We've funded land and nature projects to the tune of £2 billion since 1994. So that's, again, a very important priority for us. And so, yeah, I think listening to sort of today and what you've said so far, I think it is quite clear that if you can think about a church, its building and its community sort of in the round, you are more likely to be sort of delivering those joint principles of improving your own organisational sustainability and helping the environment at the same time. It's a simple point, but I think it's very important. So, whether that's engaging young people who are sort of inspired to get involved with the church for the first time through the environmental movement, as Kitty's sort of shown that interest, or thinking about the sort of the carbon reduction, the carbon impact of your building by thinking, well, yes, what the basics, is it watertight? What's the insulation like? Those kind of questions are fulfilling the two aims, and I think we can get some really exciting and valuable projects as a result. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you very much. So I threw out that question, which I think, Lucy, you were in some senses also addressing, as Nick did, about how can the tension between conserving our built heritage and mitigating the causes of climate emergency be reconciled. I don't see this really as question time, so to speak. So I'm not going to pit you against each other. I don't think that's the nature of this conference at all. That's for hustings, which I'm sure you'll all be going to later on at some stage. But I wondered, Rob, you actually put that question down as a question we could ask. So I wonder what your response was.
Well, I don't know whether I have one. What we need to increasingly do is find cleverer solutions to problems. There's lots of jargon about multiple benefits and win-win outcomes. But you cut that down to what it really means is we need to be doing both. We need to be preserving, protecting what's important to us culturally, but we also need to be safeguarding that for future generations to enjoy. So we just need to be smarter. We need to double think things. I suppose I was talking to someone over lunch about coast protection. In the Victorian era, the idea that there was a town or a village sitting on the edge of a cliff and the cliff was eroding, well, that's easily solved. We'll build a whopping great sea defence out of the hardest materials we can find. That was the Victorian solution to coastal management. We've now got the legacy of that. We've got the sea, rather than coming up a beach in and out, as you'd expect the tide to do. With a hard sea wall, you have the tide going up and down because the beach is removed. So, the sort of hard engineering solution is not, in the long term, always the appropriate one. But we can preserve what we've got, and we can do it in a way which is adaptable and maybe respects the desires or the needs of future generations as well as this one. I'm not sure if that answers my own question. But
Yeah,
I mean, I go with that entirely. I think it's about being technologically wise and creative, isn't it? And I was talking to someone earlier about, I think it was solar panels, and them saying, the development and the design of solar panels is rapid. I just wonder whether there's a role for the church here in terms of lobbying at national level, almost with, a business development hat on. Let's push for solar panels or other measures that can achieve what we want to achieve in terms of energy consumption, etc., but addresses those sensitive issues about the appearance of a building, the heritage of the building, and so on. So I pose that really as a question, I think. Church has got a role to play, I think.
Thankfully, yeah. So Lucy and then Nick.
just wanted to give a kind of maybe a couple of examples of projects that we've funded, and really not far from here is, I think, is it Westgate by the Sea. It's basically a church that has a sort of a 60s annex. They made the decision that for their future use for that building, they would have their activities in the 60s annex as opposed to the modern, the old part of the building. And therefore, the work we funded looked at doing draft insulation and secondary glazing for that annex. Another project. St Mary's Stebbing, which is in Essex, again is sort of it's about looking at the sort of the draft and the insulation and sort of the work which will reduce your heating bills effectively, but within a kind of without adding through sort of air source heat pumps or PV panels, a way to sort of reduce sort of heating costs through other measures. So I think focusing on conservation and the condition of buildings and thinking sensibly about where you want to use which parts of the building you want to use is really the answer to that question. Thanks.
Thanks. Well, I think one of the basic principles of the legal base in this whole area is what's called the Duffield Principles. That's whereby the greater the change you want to make to your church, the greater the justification has to be, and although nothing is ruled out. So it means that, if you want to make a really radical change, that will make a radical change to the appearance of a highly listed church, then you've got to have a very good reason for doing it. But if that reason is there, the Chancellor and the courts will accept it. I think often there are adaptations that can be made. In the Sir Peter Mancroft case, the solar panels were put in a location specifically chosen for the fact that it was not visible from the ground, and the air source heat pumps were tucked away in a back alley, which would be not noticeable really to a passerby. In the Mundersey case, the slates were the solar slates were different in colour from the roof, but on the other hand, it looks like a normal slate roof. It's really quite clever, and I think technology is advancing pretty rapidly in a lot of these areas. That kind of thing offers the way forward, more discreet and tucked away interventions that are compatible with the beauty of these buildings, which are really also part of our heritage and something we want to pass on to future generations.
So that comment. So that comment, just because I think some people online can't hear it if we don't use a microphone, is about doing it in a sympathetic way for those in the future. I love it the way that Munsley is being mentioned so often. So I think now open questions to the floor, really, with Saul on the roving microphone, which I hope he has. He has. Right. Question.
Is it right for Christian communities to be contributing to one of our ways of destroying the human race, which is the raising of the temperatures, the air and the sea and everything else? Should there not be a focus on insulating? What is St Peter Mancroft going to look like with a thermal camera when they are heating their, as is acknowledged, a very poorly insulated, overglazed building? The heat pumps and everything are not a,
Should we heat our churches? So I missed the first bit. It was a bit unclear. I'm sorry. I don't know if you all heard that here. So could you just repeat the question a little bit? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear the precise nature of the question. Could you repeat it?
the St Peter Mancroft project is to heat a poorly insulated building, and that is going to contribute to global warming, which is a very urgent thing to address.
And should we be doing that, is your question? Should we be...
I think, no, I
Okay,
think...
but your question is to the panel. Should we be heating... Is that going against the gospel to create more heat, more energy in a place such as St Peter's Mancroft?
Yes, if I can kick off, I suppose. I don't suppose many of these churches were originally heated. And certainly not by the sort of high-tech means that they currently are. And somebody mentioned about heating the person, not the space. And I think St Peter Mancroft fulfills a number of different roles. So it's not a regular church in that sense, and they probably are a high energy user, electricity user. So it's absolutely right, I would say, to be generating that energy from passive means. But in terms of, today we've had a boiler heating hot water for us to drink. There's probably surplus hot water in there. That could be used to fill hot water bottles to heat the person. We need to go for sometimes appropriate technology, low-tech solutions to things. There could be very, very straightforward answers to how we heat churches. And there's no doubt that insulating houses is by far and away one of the most efficient things we can do to reduce our emissions nationwide.
Nick?
It's often a question of the usage of the church. I mean, I think it'd be very inappropriate to overheat a church that was barely used. I mean, where it can be more justified is if the churches are used often. I mean, some churches are used every day, particularly these larger urban churches are used every day, and you can justify it. Some churches may not indeed require heating at all. Small rural churches, some manage without heating. It is the case, paradoxically, that often the older generation are more tolerant of cold than the younger generation. I mean, I think it's particularly that sometimes the very elderly can be very hardy because of the different circumstances of their upbringing, and in some rural churches they don't seem to need any heating at all. There are things, as the bishop said, there's the use of things like the heated cushions, or you could simply tell people to wear an extra coat. I don't know. So it's not always the case that heating is necessary or required. But I think those big, heavily used churches with quite a broad range of activities, you can make the case a bit more strongly, I think, there.
So in some of my churches we have blankets now. I wish I'd brought some of the blankets here to help those who are feeling a bit cold today. Anyone else, or should we take another question?
My question is to the panel. We are talking really about conflict here. We're talking about the issue of providing environmentally friendly heating, not moving too far away from energy conservation, and yet we have these magnificent historic buildings which were never designed for the purpose. And we have this dilemma where we still want to use them with great affection, but we're finding that they are not environmentally friendly buildings for at least 3 months of the year. So my question is, we're all trying very hard to move towards solutions to the current issues related to climate change, and whereas we might, with developments in technology, get superior answers to some of the questions we're asking of these buildings, there are other issues which I would like to just mention, which are the restrictive elements related to planning, grade 1, grade 2 listings. We're talking about List B applications. We're talking about English heritage, etc., etc. And they are buildings of great requirement and preserved in principle for our benefit for the long term. And I would like to hear what compromises, what latitudes are being extended by the people represented on the panel here towards their contribution to making it simpler, easier, more direct for what are really people operating within a church framework. They're not professionals, a lot of them, and may at times feel the need for a bit of expert advice, but generally speaking, they are not within the framework of what we'd call professionals, and so we would expect latitude, I think, and a more positive approach from the authorities as such involved with our beautiful churches. So could you outline for us some of the points that
I think
that
I've
you're
got
assisting
it.
with?
I think I've got your question. It's like, so how can we allow some of the restrictive planning aspects to move with greater ease and fluidity to allow us to respond to this tension that we all are aware that happens between our historic buildings? Who would like to start? Do you want to start? And then I might go to Lisa. Great.
Okay. Well, I mean, my day job really is managing these kind of applications, and I'm well aware that the system is not as user-friendly as it could be, particularly for people who are not used to working with IT or who just find it daunting. I found it pretty daunting when I started myself, so there's no reason why a church warden or something shouldn't find it pretty heavy going. We try to make it as easy as possible. We're always at the end of a telephone. We're happy to often to fill in forms for people if necessary, or talk them through the forms, or to work with them in any way that makes the handling of these applications or these processes simpler. We are stuck with the fact that this is a legal process. It's a legal system which covers these applications, and of course the civil side have their own legal system as well. So it has to be pretty meticulous, but certainly if there are difficulties in handling that process, I hope that me and my team are ready at all times to help with facilitating this kind of exercise.
Hi. Yes, I totally agree with what the point you're making, and I think, as I said, our new strategy is really built effectively as feedback to that criticism. I mean, as I said, there are 4 investment principles. Applicants get to choose how they structure their bid so that they can weight on one and not deal with the other 3 to the same extent. So as a result, in practice, what that means, that if you are a church and for you it is sort of repairing the roof from a very conservation fabric point of view to share your heritage, you can apply to us for that project. Yes, there would be a requirement to look at environmental sustainability, but if the majority of the costs focus on the repairs, that is fine for us. Equally, if you're saying actually it's climate change and the environmental sustainability of my building that is what I want to build my project around, again, we will, if that's within the investment principle of protecting the environment, we're happy to fund that too. So I think if you then combine that with our we have reviewed our forms to make them simpler, and also started online webinars from our engagement teams to help people apply and get to know the systems. I think, we're listening to that criticism. Thank you.
I'll say something. Absolutely, we need to make it easier. We need to make access to grants easier, and we need to make bureaucratic processes such as planning or applications through the diocesan board, etc., simpler. It's easy to say that. How do we make it simpler? We've been operating a planning system for many, many, many years, and it should be straightforward by now. We can, I suppose, well, it was brilliant to hear from the Norfolk Wildlife Trust earlier on about how they can come to help people with their churchyards and provide free advice and free surveys. And maybe we need to think about how we can develop a system whereby we can provide free advice and free assistance for those other things as well. And that's something worth thinking about, whether we can give church ambassadors, maybe, or grants for the development of projects as well as grants for the actual delivery of projects.
So I just want to take the next question myself because I have a set of questions in front of me. And it seems a shame, particularly as some of you produce these questions. And I think this really draws a little bit on what Kitty was talking about and eco-anxiety, which is another aspect that we should do. And Nigel, it comes out of a question you suggested we might reflect on. And that is, we have eco-anxiety within our young people. And if we take the average age of the people who all of us in this room, we realize where we are. So the question is, how can we, through our church buildings and through the partnerships that we can build, address that to bring real change and to give real hope within our communities? Oh, and a hand immediately goes up, and how delighted to pass it.
Because actually this aligns very much with another point that I really wanted to make today, that in my personal opinion, as important as reducing the carbon footprint of church buildings is to addressing the climate crisis, from where I'm sitting and looking at the projects that we're funding, it's actually the potential of projects to be spreading the message to wider communities and young people and getting them involved in changing the sort of everyday sort of life sort of behaviour that I think is where churches and church groups can really make a really big difference for the climate change. And climate anxiety is exactly one of those elements. As Kitty was making a very powerful point, that when you feel that you can't do, there's something sort of anxiety-inducing out there and you can't do anything about it, that's a really horrible position to be in. Doing something, even at a very local level, I think will address that. And I think that's one of the reasons I really like working with churches and places of worship, because that they were and continue to be hubs of the community and provide those opportunities for sort of engagement and participation. And I think focusing on that aspect of green projects is really the main solution there.
So Nigel, as that comes out of one of your questions, can I throw it at you?
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me a number of things, really. I think the point Lucy makes, and I made earlier about churches being a catalyst for action in the wider community, I think is very important here. I was really interested in what Kitty was saying about I guess the barriers to intergenerational solutions and action. And I think we've got to make more efforts to cross that barrier, to actually, combine young and old and other groups within society. The other comment I wanted to make, and it was a question I was going to put to Polly. Is Polly still here? Where are you, Polly? Yes. Thank you for that presentation on Eco Church. Was really inspiring. But I was going to ask you, and I think the eco-church movement, in terms of this catalyst for change, is a really powerful weapon that I think we've got. And my question, I suppose, really was about the extent to which that system, the eco-church system, is sensitive to the different conditions that we find in different churches and in different communities. And as an example, I'm involved with a church which is decided to become a festival church. So we're only providing 6 services a year. So the notion of congregation to us is very different perhaps to another church where there are regular services and a regular congregation. So at some point, and maybe I don't know whether we could ask Polly to comment, but I mean, I'd be interested in a response to that. You know, is the eco church system sensitive, if you feel like, to those different circumstances, and has it got a role in bringing the community involved together as well?
Saul is on the case. No, that's fine. That's fine. I think it's good to encourage dialogue.
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer very briefly. So first of all, that's one of the reasons for the new church, the revised Eco Church survey. Yes, it is one church, one survey, and yes, you have to fit your church into it, but the new survey will have 3 strands for the building part of that survey. So if you're a small church that opens once a month or 4 times a year, that is different to a church that has its doors open every day or is a big building, big church in a very lively community. So there are 3 strands. Yes, of course, there's still going to be nuances, and it's not perfect. It is a tool, and you have to self-assess and fit yourself within that. But we hope it'll help a bit more with that aspect.
Yes. I think while it's true that climate change is a huge challenge, but it's probably not a challenge that we can't overcome. And it's worth bearing in mind that these churches in this part of the world are markers, if you like, memorials to a series of struggles that our ancestors had to overcome. You know, our ancestors had to deal with illnesses that wiped out, a third of the population. They had to deal with, I think it's 25 parishes that were washed away in coastal erosion in the Middle Ages. Our people lived through wars and of a kind which we can barely imagine. And these churches, have witnessed all that through their history. And it probably indicates that perhaps our communities and perhaps our faith is a bit more resilient than we sometimes think.
Thank you, Nick. Right, so we have time for one more question. Can it be a nice pithy question, and can we have pithy responses? Or else Saul will glare at me, and he's got a little card he puts up and it says, "Shut up, David." I think so.
Where we're trying to inspire people to go on the net zero journey, why is it we're so keen to hide the technology away so that people can't see what we're doing? And is there anything we can do to improve the visibility and how we communicate it? I mean, I'm looking at the heating system in here and going, it's lovely integrated into the chandeliers. I don't know how many other people have noticed it, but we can do things to integrate it into our fabric. But sometimes it would be good to really shout about it as well. How can we do that?
So actually, a Roman Catholic colleague put that exact question to me when he said, surely we should put solar panels on the front of the church so everyone going past it sees it and knows what we are doing. There. Who would like to answer that question first?
I'll have a go. I mean, I think that there was mention earlier on of demonstration projects, and that's a brilliant way of getting the message across. Lay it bare, show people what you're doing, and not just to your own community, the church community, but the wider community. The district council put a carport, a solar PV carport over the car park at the Reef Leisure Centre in Sheringham, and that was, to some extent, it was a bit of a trial project. I mean, it will wash its own face financially. It'll be beneficial in terms of climate mitigation. It will be beneficial, but actually we wanted it to be a demonstration of how you can do things. So no, you're absolutely right. You shouldn't hide things away, and neither should we hide away the sort of negative things. Why is the exhaust pipe at the back of the car, not the front of the car, where you can smell your own emissions, as it were. But no. I think we pride ourselves in the design of beautiful spaces, and we don't want them to be sort of retrofitted in an intrusive way, and that might actually achieve the wrong thing if people don't like sort of ugly technology. But no, demonstration projects, I think, are the way to do it.
I think it is a fair point. Why not? But we are in the business of bringing as many people along with us on this sort of this journey, and perhaps, you know, handling things a bit more discreetly might be a better way of doing it. Our heritage partners sometimes obstruct what we're doing, or, you know, get up our nose a bit, but their concerns are valid, and they have their own role in protecting what is the finest collection of medieval churches anywhere in the world. So I'd be a bit squeamish about riding roughshod over them, but I do take the point about the demonstrator effect there.
To kind of back up your point and kind of fly the flag for the heritage conservation point of view. I mean, coming back to this anxiety issue, I mean, I would argue that some of the benefit that people get from historic places of worship in particular is its unchangeability. And while there's definitely space for sort of, I would say, a monument or sort of a part of it to show, as you've said, what we've been living through in our times and how we're responding to that. I think fundamentally the conservation movement would say it's about protecting the inherent sort of beauty and consistency of a structure, so that in 100, in 200, I mean, these are, you know, some of these buildings have been here for 1,000 years. So sort of in 500 years' time, we can look at it and say this is continuity. So thanks.
Thank you. Nigel.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tackle this from the nature point of view rather than buildings, because I think for me it's about changing perceptions and expectations. Do you mow your lawn once a week? Possibly more frequently, I don't know. I don't anymore because I recognise the benefits that has to nature. So I think, you know, I've heard the phrase, we used to have perhaps we still have a campaign called Keep Britain Tidy. Well, in relation to litter, I would totally agree with that. But maybe we need a Keep Britain Untidy movement in relation to the environment, to the landscape, to actually create and be positive about creating habitats for nature that might not look conventionally tidy in our gardening sense, but have got other benefits. I think we've got to make the case for that as well.
Nigel, you lead us with a question about wilding, which is not going to be addressed here because we are just out of time, I'm afraid. So all four of you, thank you very much indeed for asking these questions, answering the questions, and thank you for your questions too.